The next two chemical senses are both smell and taste. So smell, as you know, is olfaction, taste is gustation, and these both senses complement each other. They're both based on using chemoreceptors, where chemicals must be dissolved and picked up by the receptors. So the olfaction, the smell receptors, are dissolved in nasal fluids. Taste or gustation receptors respond to chemicals dissolved in saliva. So the organ of smell is the olfactory epithelium. It's located on the roof of the nasal cavity. So what happens is there's sensory neurons which are activated. There's bipolar neurons present, which remember are only in the special receptors. We can see them on this next slide. So they begin at the olfactory epithelium. Then there is the olfactory bulb located in the ethmoid bone and the olfactory tract. So this all begins at the olfactory nerve, as you know. These neurons, unlike other neurons, have stem cells which give rise to new neurons every 30 to 60 days. And the mitral cells are the second order neurons. So that would be the somatosensory system, the second step on the way to the brain. And these impulses are activated at the mitral cells. They travel via olfactory tracts to the piriform lobe of the olfactory cortex. So the piriform lobe of the olfactory cortex is where the sense of smell is basically interpreted. Just like for vision, the vision is interpreted in the visual cortex, which is in the occipital lobe. And what's interesting about smell is there's also information sent to other places like the hypothalamus, amygdala, and emotional center, like the limbic system. So let's say, for example, you smell a certain perfume or a cologne that reminds you of an ex, and that may stimulate good or bad feelings. A homeostatic imbalance associated with smell is what's called anosmia. Kind of sounds like a schnosmia, so maybe that'll help you remember. It has to do with the nose. So if there's a head injury that tears an olfactory nerve, that would damage it, obviously, or certain neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease. Also, certain people that have olfactory auras prior to epileptic seizures, these are called olfactory hallucinations. Sometimes they could be due to problems within the olfactory cortex. So when we talk about gustation now, gustation all begins at the sensory organ for taste, which is the taste bud. And these taste buds are located on the tongue in pig-like projections called papillae. Remember from chapter 5, you learned about the dermal papillae. So it's the same peg-like sort of structure. These are names for different types of papillae. Specifically, the foliate papillae are located on the sides of the tongue. The valate papillae are on the back of the tongue. They form a V-shaped structure that we see here. And then there's also the fungiform pillae, which is towards the front of the tongue. There's very few taste buds that are located in the back of the throat. So the gustatory epithelial cells are those initial taste receptor cells that have microvilli called gustatory hairs, and they're bathed in that saliva. And these epithelial cells also have stem cells that are replaced every 7 to 10 days. So this explains what would happen after, maybe a hot pepper might damage some of your taste buds. And you can see the structure of the taste bud here in a valate papilla. So our basic taste sensations are listed for you on this slide. There is sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And umami was probably discovered in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the sweet makes sense. It would be activated by sugar, saccharin, alcohol, amino acids, or lead salts. Sour would be hydrogen ions, so things with a low pH. Salty would be metal ions like sodium chloride or potassium chloride, something like that. Bitter would be activated by quinine and nicotine. Caffeine and things like aspirin. Tonic water, for example, is something that has quinine in it. And the last taste sensation is glutamate and aspartate, two amino acids that are present in beef and cheese, and specifically contain monosodium glutamate. You've noticed, I'm sure, over the years that a lot of places um, will list that there's no MSG present because a lot of people tend to be allergic to MSG. And there is a possible sixth taste, which is very interesting. It is specifically for long chain fatty acids from lipids. These are specifically abbreviated as VLCFA, very long chain fatty acids. You're not responsible. That's kind of just an FYI thing. So the taste dislikes do have homeostatic value. The dislike or sourness does provide a protective way of warning us if something is spoiled or poisonous. So we have to be very thankful for that. For the physiology of taste, the, as I mentioned, the chemical must be dissolved in the saliva, diffuses into the taste pore, and contacts the gustatory hairs. At that point, the chemical binds to a membrane. There's a neurotransmitter that binds to the dendrite, initiates a potential. In this case, it's called a generator potential, and they can adapt in 3 to 5 seconds. So this is one sense that's able to adapt. The taste transduction, which remember is essentially like translation. So we're translating a stimulus into nerve system language, essentially. So depolarization begins. Some of these make sense, like salty taste is due to sodium influx, sour taste is due to hydrogen acting intracellularly, and there are unique receptors for the three other types of taste. And then for the gustatory pathway, the pathway for the brain, there are three main cranial nerves that pair, or nerve pairs that carry taste impulses from the tongue to the brain. And the first one is the facial nerve. The facial nerve is cranial nerve number 7. And if you look on this diagram, you can see that it comes from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. The glossopharyngeal, which is cranial nerve number 9, is going to transmit sensory input from the posterior third and the pharynx. And then finally, cranial nerve 10, which we know is the vagus nerve, is from the epiglottis and the lower pharynx. And remember, there's not a lot of taste buds back there. Again, just like in the taste of smell, the hypothalamus and the emotional center, the limbic system is also involved. Taste is 80% smell, so this explains why if your nose is blocked, the food tastes bland. And the mouth is really a combination of temperature receptors, mechanoreceptors, as well as nociceptors, in addition to chemoreceptors.